All right, I think we're live. We're a couple of minutes early. Um, for at least a little bit, you're probably going to hear my kids in the background talking through the monitor and being nonsensical. Um, I'm sure we'll be able to live with that. So, for all of you who are here, ask questions through Twitter. Remind those of you who are my old students. Anybody else, you can go ahead and do it through the question and answer feed here through the Google Hangout. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can, and we'll kind of go from there. I'll recap a little bit from what I said the other day about the exam. Remember, 70 multiple choice questions in 55 minutes. The big place where people get tripped up and why the multiple choice is so difficult is because a lot of people try to go through and answer one, chronologically or numerically. You go 1, 2, 3, 4. If you look at a question, you're like, I don't know this, skip it. Go to one that you know, and make sure you answer all the ones, because you never know. Maybe 65 through 70 are some of the easier questions, or at least questions that you feel really comfortable with, and and so don't get stuck up. If you're going through a question and it's not clicking, then skip it and you can come back to it. Try to work backwards. I mean, certainly go through, read the question. If an answer, before you even look at the answers, if you read a question, the first thing that pops in your head is a certain answer idea, go through the answer choices. If one of those 4 matches up pretty well with what your initial first thought was, go with it. Don't get cute. Don't overthink it. Oftentimes, a lot of people, and remember, this happens in class. A lot of times people get kind of psyched out about their answers and everything. They think that, oh, well, this is an AP question. It's got to be more difficult than this. It can't be the first thing that pops in my head. When often that is exactly how it is. You know more than you think sometimes. Or sometimes they do. They will give you some questions that are, I don't want to say easy, but easier. And you'll know the answers. You'll be able to eliminate. And again, if you go through, you're unsure of, you read the question, you're unsure of what the answer is, go through the multiple choice questions or responses, eliminate those that you know are wrong, try to whittle it down to 50-50. I know a lot of the things that we did in class back first semester with the questions of the day were 5 answer choices. It's only 4 for the exam, so you don't have to worry about that. And try not to get too overwhelmed. The multiple choice is a place that certainly a lot of points can get made. If you're not the strongest of writers, obviously, really try to do well on the multiple choice. If you feel that you're a pretty good writer, you can make up some of those points on the back end there, and multiple choice isn't as big an issue. The averages, again, it changes every year, so I can't necessarily say automatically if you get 35 out of 70 right, you're in the ballpark, at least are on the right track for a 3. But that's kind of where statistics go. If you can get around half of the multiple choice, if you can get 12 points out of the 3 essays, you're usually fairly good. It's somewhere in that 3 range. And that's middle of 3. That's not low end to get a 3. So if you're getting 40%, there's still chances you can get a 3. Obviously, you're going to have to do a little bit better on the essays. And the essays, same thing. You get a 10-minute break. You get the 3 essays all together. Go through the essays. And if one of them jumps out and you're like, I know this material, I think it's fairly, I don't want to say it's easy, but you feel pretty confident that you can write about it, then pick that one first and start there. I'd always say for all 3 essays, take 2 minutes or so and write out on the exam booklet a quick outline, just so you can kind of put some thoughts down, how you want to break your facts up, especially for the CCOT and comparative. You got to have 6 kind of key points or facts or whatever. And so I don't know why. And so make sure you get those down in that outline, so that way you can kind of go back and you have that there, so you can go through and say, hey, I remember this. This is what I need to make sure that I hit on. If none of them look great, or they all are kind of equal where you feel okay, start with the DBQ, because that is the one that usually, if you remember how to write the DBQs that we worked on a little bit, we did the parts a lot. Hopefully you've still done a little bit. I know you've at least done one this semester with the globalization one with McDonald's and everything. You can go through and get points. I mean, have a good thesis, use the documents, make 3 groups, make sure that your documents make sense and go along with the 3 groups you pick. I mean, that puts you almost at 4 points right there. You add in the missing voice, which again, I would put in the introductory paragraph. You don't have to necessarily have a conclusion. So you can put that in the intro, tie it into your thesis somehow, and also make sure that you have the point of views. And again, point of view doesn't always have to be what's the motivation or bias, or actually it can be any of those. I'm sorry, it can be motivation, it can be bias. It gives some kind of context for why this person is saying what they're saying at this time. And that's something, hopefully, if you do that fairly well, you can score a little bit higher, get 5, 6s, maybe even get a 7 or into the expanded core. And that'll get you a long way. I mean, usually, if you want a chance for a 5, you have to be a good writer. Not to say that it's impossible, but I would say it's about, finding a unicorn rare, that you're going to have somebody who gets 27 out of 27, or even I would say 24 out of 24, 21 out of 21. I mean, somebody who's consistently getting 7s on all 3 essays. That's a very tall order to take. So, looking to shoot for that 4 hopefully helps. And make sure you have a good thesis. Make sure you know the thesis. Please, for the CCOT, don't forget the dates. If you don't have the dates, if your thesis statement doesn't start out from this date to this date, and they give you the dates with the prompt, if it doesn't start out that way, you're running the risk that your thesis isn't going to count. And if your thesis doesn't count, the rest of the paper shot. So it's the most important thing to go out and make sure that you have a strong thesis statement. If you have good thesis statements for all 3 essays, your essays have a chance at least getting that middle to high scores. If your thesis statement is weak, then it's going to be tough to get above probably a 2 or a 3. And if that's the case, then you're really going to have to do well in the multiple choice. So rather than putting yourself in that kind of bind, try your best to make sure you have good thesis statements. Tomorrow, I don't know what you'll be doing in class for all of my students with your last day to review. If you got a little bit of time to doodle, go back through some of the old prompts that I put links on the webpage. Just look at the essay prompt and write a thesis. Have a friend look at it. Send it to me if you want. The classes I teach for the most part are, my students all got MacBooks. They're online doing work. Tomorrow they're doing web quests. So if you need to email me, I can probably get back to you pretty quickly. So if you want to do some practice thesis statements, do that, and I'll critique it tomorrow in real time. I know there's probably lots of review things going on. I've retweeted some of the ones going on by other teachers. There's the Kahoot review. I hope some of you are able to do those kinds of things. Please don't pull an all-nighter tomorrow thinking I'm going to study for 8 hours and I'm going to knock this thing out. It's Thursday morning. Go to bed. Tell your significant other, tell your family, tell your friends, hey, 10 o'clock rolls around, leave me alone, I'm going to bed. Because you got to be at the church early. Test starts at 8. If you're not ready to go and checked in, you're going to have to do makeup, and they're not real thrilled about doing makeup tests. So make sure you're there on time. You've got some kind of ID, all the things that they've told you about in these prep things that Ms. Vanderveer and hopefully Mr. Buck have warned you about. Make sure that you are on point and ready to go. And then once you're done at 11:30, 12 o'clock, hopefully you've got cool parents and they'll let you take the rest of the day off. So that's, I guess, kind of my little ramble for the exam. I see there aren't many of you here, but if any of you guys have questions, I will gladly answer any and all questions that you guys have. And hopefully I'll have some, and if not, and I'd hate to shut it down too early, but I don't know if I can just ramble on and on about the exam and not get bored or repeat myself. So any questions to my 10 viewers out there? 9 now, 10, somebody who can't decide. The activity here is overwhelming. I guess while I patiently wait, I can go back through some of the things with the different course or units. We've got unit 1 and 2 really are combined. Again, you're going to have 14 questions per unit for the multiple choice. Units 1 and 2. Oh, thank God, I have an exam question, or I have a question. Good, because I didn't know what I was going to ramble. Thank you, Aaron. What exactly should we bring to the exam? From what I can remember and been told, and again, this was only 1 year, unfortunately, that I've got experience with this. Brings layers. From what I understand, the church is absolutely freezing, like my room level cold. If I'm assuming the room is still the same way. So definitely bring a jacket, a sweatshirt, something. Worst comes to worst, you get hot, you can take it off, but I would have it there because it is really, really cold there. And other than that, I think a pencil. I'm pretty sure you'll need at least either your school ID or a driver's license or something just to prove that you are the person that you are supposed to be. So, you don't have somebody coming in and taking the test for you. And do your best to try to have breakfast there in the morning. So you're not, starving throughout the entire thing. All right, I'm starting to get some questions here. So hopefully that helps there a little bit, Aaron. Let's see, I'll try to go in order. I've got questions from Caitlin, Jessica, and then Bailey, and so I'll start with Caitlin. Key things to know about the River Valley civilizations. Key things, certainly to remember where they were. That you have the big four. Mesopotamia, that's where most things start. If they talk about Gilgamesh or Hammurabi, those are all Mesopotamia. Those are the first city-states. Egypt is big. The pyramids, obviously, the Pharaoh. You have the Indus River Valley, which would become India. China is different. The four of them, there are very few and random examples of interaction or trade between these places. For the most part, they're very individual. Mesopotamia is first, Egypt, and then Indus River and China come afterwards. I'm trying to think what other things to know. Power and religion always go hand in hand with them. They very much believe that the leader was given power through their gods, even to the point that the rulers were gods. They're all polytheistic. They're all animistic, where the physical places on earth had spiritual kind of aspects to them. The gods were pretty much used for anything that happened in life. If there's a storm that ruined the crops, it was because the gods were unhappy and the people need to do better. This is something you see throughout a lot of the ancient, even up to ancient Greece and Rome, where anything that was unexplainable, it was the gods then. And if it was good, it's because we're doing good things and we're honoring the gods. If it's bad, it's because we're being bad and we need to be better. You have a lot of early inventions. The other big, most of all have to do with farming, irrigation, that kind of stuff. The other big things you'll see is, and I apologize for my son if the audio is picking that up. The other big thing would be, this is the beginning of religious ideals, bringing people together, political things happening. It goes hand in hand with the rise of agriculture. If you've got people and to make food, and you start to have food surpluses, you then need other specializations of jobs. Not everyone has to be constantly looking for food, so they can go out and make crafts, art. People are going to have to protect the food. People are going to protect the citizens. People are going to have to lead and decide who's in charge of watching over these things. So that's how these places built up the early kind of political and governmental systems and structures that we have seen evolve from there. And I think I've covered most of that. It's the main time where you see, I guess for environmental, to cover all of the spice things, this is the main time where you see people go from having to adapt to the environment to switching it where now they can start to adapt the environment to best suit themselves. Next question. Is it a good idea to put our thesis statements at the very beginning of your intro paragraph? Personal preference, I would say no. Personal preference, I would put it at the end of the introductory paragraph. I still think you want to have some kind of good, or close to the end, I should say, because I know the DBQ, I say do thesis statement and then you're missing voice. I'd still try to have a sentence or two as kind of an intro or a catch or a hook, rather than you jump right in and here's my thesis and here's my paper. Again, it all kind of goes with that good writing, whether they're supposed to grade that way and look at it as more of a kind of an English lit thing. They shouldn't, but they do. And I'll admit, even I've done that when grading essays. If I've got something that starts out well, sometimes I tend to be a little bit more lenient with things otherwise. If something comes out kind of drab and boring from the get-go, that can affect people. And remember, when these people who are grading them, this is what they're doing for really 4 days straight, some of them reading up to 200 a day. So if you want that paper to kind of stand out or pop a little bit, you have to go through and try to have or find something that maybe can separate yours. And maybe it's that 1 or 2 sentences, that hook, that introduction, rather than going right into your thesis. And nothing else, sometimes it helps for the expanded core points, where this is where you can tie in some of that extra analysis and synthesis that they're looking for. You may not have as much room in your body paragraphs, and so you can do that in your introduction. All right, so that was Jessica's question. I need to pull up my phone and go back to Bailey's question, since for whatever reason it's on my phone and not my computer. Any tips for choosing best answer between two that can both be considered correct? No, it's tough. It is, because if you remember that thing I had up, both B and C are correct, but B is more correct. You'll have a couple of those. I hope that you won't come across more than 2 or 3 of that you can look at it and be like, oh, it's easily one of these two. Some of those maybe nitpick. You got to kind of nitpick and really, if you get to one of those where you're like, man, I swear this is 2. If you feel that you're focusing on it too long, circle it, skip it, and come back to it. You may find something else in the test rather, that a tangent that sparks your memory and can bring you back and get you to choose between the 2. Or sometimes, again, you just need that thought process, and that's how a lot of times these thinking kind of happens. Sometimes is you go away from something, you take it away from the forefront of what you're focusing on, and all of a sudden, a minute, 3 minutes later, something will pop into your head and you'll be like, oh, okay, it's this out of these 2. And then you can go back and do it. So don't be afraid if you feel you're stuck between 2 answers, skip it for a moment and then come back to it. At least when you come back to it, rather than having to break down all 4, you at least have already got it down to 2. And I don't want to say worst case scenario is if you're pressed for time there at the end, you've got it down to 50-50. But I would definitely go through and try, if you're down to 2 and you're really unsure of it, skip it, put it aside, go through the rest of the test. Because, like I said, you may find questions somewhere else that not necessarily deal with the question, but sometimes you can get that tangent where, well, this question kind of deals with this, and you can kind of make the points back to that question, and something triggers in your brain that'll give you that answer between the two that you were having a tough time choosing between. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Bailey. It's not definitive, I know, sorry. But hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay. Can you go through each unit and talk about the main concepts that we need to know for each one? I will do my best, and that's from Aaron because I know. And Audrey, your question's next. It's gonna be tough to cover everything from each unit, but like I said, I will do the best that I can with that. I think I started off. I think I did Unit 1 with what Caitlin asked earlier, so you can go back and rewatch. So I don't want to repeat myself necessarily, to waste time, but that's beginning of agriculture, and really, really go through all the key concepts. That's always the best place to start, is to go through them and really try to see the big points that they choose to stand out. The beginning of agriculture is going to be the big theme for Unit 1, and this beginning of civilization, turning us from hunter-gatherers and these random clans and groups that hunted and gathered and lived together in that respect, to turning them into societies and civilizations that start to have different jobs and roles and social classes, etc. Unit 2 is the progression of that. So how we've gone from small agricultural societies growing into bigger, now kind of empires. And we see this in China, we see this with India, and most notably we see it with Greece and Rome for Unit 2. This is also, you see the beginnings of the Olmecs in Mesoamerica. There are peoples in South America, the Chavan and others, which are important, but they're still kind of in that early, almost river valley civilization type societies and structures. Same with what's going on with Africa with the Bantu and everything. But Unit 2 is more taking that next step from being individual pockets of civilization around the world to now you start to see this interconnectedness, where you have trade between different areas. You have these empires start to expand, most notably certainly Alexander and the Hellenistic Empire taking over Persia, going all the way to India. Rome will do this. China will expand greatly from the small pockets that they were into, taking over most of what is now common land, China and Mongolia, and seeing the political structure and social structures really continue to grow and evolve to what fits these cities best. And now, again, you have those that farm and make the food. You've got artists, you've got traders, you've got merchants, you've got military, and the people that need to go and protect all those other people. You have politicians and emperors and kings who are in charge of making sure everyone's doing their roles. Religion will play a big part in all these things. Again, it still is fairly polytheistic. It's still tied very much to religion and who gets power and what they can now justify their actions with, saying it's God's will, etc. Unit 3 is really dominated. Again, Muslims and Mongols are kind of the two big key points. Islam's going to become the first global religion that's going to tie the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia, as well as parts of East and West Africa together. You see Christianity rise throughout Europe and in other pockets throughout the world, to be kind of that bond that's going to bring people together. Because we lack, at least certainly in Europe, you do have the Byzantines in Eastern Europe, but Western Europe, for the most part, is going to lack a strong empire like you saw with Rome that's going to hold the people together. There's much more trade. There's much more kind of global interaction, even though it's just Africa, Europe, and Asia. We start to see overseas, the Indian Ocean trade routes start to open up, where we didn't see that as much in Unit 1 and 2, Mediterranean. You see trade routes in Northern Europe with the Vikings and some of the things that they start out with the Hanseatic League and etc. Um, and I know that the famous thing is this is the Dark Ages, but if you go back to that crash course with John Green that we watched forever ago, I mean, it's really not. This is a time where there's still a lot going on in Western Europe, um, culturally and politically. It wasn't the big empires. Yes, it's not the Renaissance, but not many times in history brought about that kind of art and literature and awake, kind of spiritual awakening. Religion's very, very dominant in all parts of the world. China goes through its golden age with the Tang and Song, and you see the Mongols rise from almost nothing to taking over all of China and East Asia, um, the Middle East, almost make it to Africa, take over parts of Eastern Europe, Russia. Really, the only place they don't get is India. And we did the Socratic kind of on the what if. I mean, they really were on the verge of taking over most of Europe, but um, random kind of events brought them back to some of their main leaders and generals back. And like all empires, they get too big. You start to have weaker leadership after you have very, very strong rulers, and the empire is going to crumble. It happens with everything. We saw this with Alexander, with Rome, the Mongols, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, every Spain, every Britain, everybody does this. Eventually, it gets just too big for you to be able to handle. People usually don't like being ruled by other people, um, and you see resistances, and people fight back and push out the oppressing rulers that they see. Four, you see the age of exploration and the opening to become a world, a true world. Um, I don't want to say market because it's more than just economical, but the modern world is now seen from that lens. You open up the Americas to Europe with Columbus and the things he did, and others that certainly came before him with the Vikings making it to Canada. But this is also where you're going to really see the West and especially Western Europe dominate a lot of the world, start to set up dominating a lot of the world going forward, um, because you're going to have them take on the role of colonizer, and they're going to go and use these places for resources because none of the European countries are very big. And so they're going to take natural resources. They're going to take spread religion. Usually it's Christianity in this part because that's the predominant religion in Eastern Europe. I'm sorry, Western Europe. And they're going to go to the Caribbean, North America, South America, Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and even make it to China and Japan, although that'll be less successful in Unit 5. But that's the big thing that really dominates. And, you have a lot of, there's positives, certainly. The Columbian Exchange and the huge growth rates that you see in Europe. Obviously, huge negatives. You have the genocide that happens in the Americas due to disease. You have the rise of the Atlantic slave trade. And this really sets the stage for then imperialism, which comes in Unit 5. All of these countries have made contacts to these areas. And now, rather than just make them colonies, they're going to kind of make them take more advantage of them, exploit them more, use them more for the resources they need with the rise of industrialization, which comes with Unit 5. And the other big thing with Unit 5 is going to be, other than industrialization, imperialism, is going to be revolutions. Eventually, this is where you start to see the first wave of these colonies say enough is enough and we want our freedom and independence. You see that throughout the Americas with the United States, all of the ones in Latin America, Haiti. You see other revolutions which are different. The French people fight back against its own government because of the mistreatment of the Third Estate, which was the majority, 98% of the people there. Tired of being ruled by a king, tired of having to be poor and starving and taxed to death. And this will also set the stage for others coming after in other parts of Europe. Eventually, these nationalistic kind of movements set the stage for the rise of Germany and Italy. And that moves us to Unit 6, the World Wars dominate the first half, and how everyone is involved. It's not just Germany, Britain, France, Russia, United States. Those are the 5 countries we hear about the most when we talk about World War I and World War II, but and Japan for World War II. But it's important to know the role that the Middle East, Southeast or South Asia, some of the African nations, Australia play in these sending troops, Australia is a huge ally for the United States in winning back the Pacific, World War II. After the World Wars, this is the rise of the Cold War versus the United States versus the spread of communism and containment. You see massive decolonization because European countries can no longer afford to control areas well out of their region. And there are very negative consequences usually with that. Most places, the Europeans left as quickly as possible, drew up border lines over areas that they oversaw, and left before any blood was kind of on their hands. And this happens in India and Pakistan. This happens in the Middle East. This happens in Africa. And we see these tensions grow and grow to modern day. This is why there's issues between. This is why Pakistan and India hate each other. This is why Iran and Saudi Arabia don't necessarily like each other. You go back to some of the lines drawn then. You have the tensions in the Middle East between nations that are Sunni and Shia. You have issues, obviously, Israel and Palestine, fighting over the land and religious differences there. The Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda that leads to the genocides. The Christians and Muslims in Bosnia and Serbia that leads to genocide there. The Christians and Muslims in Sudan and now South Sudan. And so you see these things go through and escalate and get worse and worse. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is tied back to the end of colonization and the, I guess, not a lot of foresight in how these line borders were drawn up, and etc. The other things you see was Unit 6, the rise in globalization, business, commerce, culture. Everything is now almost instantaneous. Science has made a huge leap forward, as it did kind of in that Renaissance area with Galileo and Copernicus and Bacon and people like that. We've seen this huge scientific kind of revolution again with the rise of more of what we know about the universe around us, the rise of the internet and all that it allows has really brought a lot more new technology and good and bad consequences, certainly with globalization to the world that we're all still trying to figure out how to kind of deal with. So hopefully I covered a lot. I'm sure I left out a lot though, but that was at least a decent rundown of all 6 units there for you. Next question. Can I review imperialism and where it was really important? Sure, Audrey. I kind of covered that in the wrap up with Unit 5. Imperialism, is going to be mostly in Africa and South Asia, India really especially. But this is driven by the European countries' need for resources. A lot of them are becoming industrial societies. You need more resources to continue to make factories work, bring in raw materials for textiles and all the other things that they're starting to really use. And so England, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, these are all smaller countries, limited resources, and so they need to go elsewhere to find them. And so they do that through imperial colonies that they have through Africa and South Asia. And we've learned certainly a lot that these countries aren't necessarily the best of friends. We saw that in Unit 4, England and Britain for the most, or England and France are going to be almost mortal enemies for a long time after the Protestant Reformation, the whole Protestant versus Catholic disagreements and ideological differences. And so this becomes a rivalry too. This is a status symbol. This is a way to show that your country is better than others. And if my neighbor has something nice, then I need to get something just as nice, if not better. And so this, again, this is what leads us up to World War One. They talk about Maine, the acronym Maine for what leads up to World War One, and this is most of what Unit 5 is. It's the advancement in militarism. Every country, oh, you added more troops, we need to add more troops. It's the alliance systems. It's imperialism and nationalism. But imperialism is really one to make sure you don't forget. It's, oh, well, you have colonies in Africa. Well, we need colonies in Africa. And if we need to fight you for it, then so be it. You had the British and Dutch fight wars in South Africa. That's the Boer War, BOER, that takes place there in South Africa, fighting over the colonies. It happened often when the weaker European countries were kind of pushed aside and taken over. It happened to the Dutch several times. It happened to them in New York. Here in the American colonies, it happens to them somewhat in the Dutch East Indies when France and other places start to take a little bit of control from them. So it's a big theme that and as I said, the consequences of it have been really detrimental too, because these countries have taken over, or once they've left, I'm sorry, and they've had to rule themselves. It hasn't been an easy transition for them. So hopefully that helps. Next question is from Caitlin. Can you list important events that distinguish the units from each other? Example, the rise of Islam in third. Sure, I'll do the best I can, certainly, because like I said, there's a lot. Unit 1, beginning of agriculture, the first 4 river valley civilizations, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China. Hammurabi's Code maybe is the other big one from that unit, from Unit 1. Unit 2, if you're talking Persia, if you're talking Alexander, if you're talking Rome or Greece, if you're talking Han China, that's all Unit 2. As far as key events, the Punic War, the Peloponnesian War, the Persian War. I'm trying to think of not wars that happened during this time. The rise of Buddhism, the beginnings of Christianity. Those are all. Most religions are going to be started during Unit 2, actually. Judaism. Hinduism, kind of Unit 1 on that border of 1 and 2. But Christianity, Confucianism, Buddhism, the other big ones, Taoism, those are all Unit 2. And Islam will come with Unit 3. As I said, Unit 3, that's the Byzantines. The Great Schism will happen, the first split of the Catholic Church between Catholic in the West and Orthodox in the East. The fall of the Roman Empire, the Mongols, the rise of Islam. The beginnings of the Aztec and Incas will be Unit 3. The beginnings of Indian Ocean trade will be Unit 3. Kind of the rise of African kingdoms, Africans trading ports, the Bantu migrations, those are mostly Unit 3. Let's see, what else? Unit 4, as I said, is mostly going to be exploration. The Renaissance and Reformation are both Unit 4 events. The Atlantic slave trade. That's really it. I guess Japan's kind of civil, the rise of the shogun and feudalism. Feudalism is really Unit 3, I guess. I'm sorry. Feudalism in Europe's Unit 3. Feudalism in Japan is Unit 3, Unit 4. Though Japan kind of becoming an empire is going to be Unit 4. If you go back, China's golden age is Unit 3. I'm out of context, but here I'm going back to what I told you guys about putting things aside and coming back to it, because I'm thinking tangentially now. 5, industrialization, imperialism, global migration, revolutions for the most part are all 4. Unit 6, the World Wars, Cold War. I mean, this should be fairly easy because it's anything that's happened in the last 100 years. So anything that seems fairly relevant or recent, that's all going to be Unit 6. So that's a quick rundown. If you had other specific examples, I can certainly tell you. But again, I'm trying not to overwhelm, I guess, too much. So hopefully that helps, Caitlin. Next question, Ethan. What are the major labor systems and their components? It's a lot. There's it's kind of complex. I'll try to cover as best I can. Certainly, there's capitalism and communism. I guess are the two kind of competing ones that you start to see with Unit Five. Um, Capitalism has a lot of different ways, or what we kind of to determine free markets where businesses get to set their um, prices, and it's all there's very little, if any, government interaction. Uh, Businesses do what they want. If it makes a profit for them, great. If it doesn't, then that's their fault, and they need to fix it. Labor systems, if you're going actually like obviously communism is the opposite. It's more of a command economy where the government is set and sets prices, sets wages, all those things. As a in its theoretical sense, it's to create equality and all those things. It doesn't work out that way really ever as far as how it's been practiced. Um, Labor systems, the three big ones that you cover in Unit 4 are going to be the encomienda system, which is the Spanish and others coming over to Europe and using the natives as workers on some of those plantations early on. It's escaped me. Damn it. You know, bleep. Well, I won't bleep that out. Um, what the Incas, the Mita system, that's what it is. The Mita, which was what the Incas and others um, did as a way that people had to work for the state or society, and it's another forced or coerced labor system. The Mita system is not forever, and most forms of early slavery were not that way. It was if you had done something wrong, this was a way to kind of it was like an indentured servitude. This was a way for you to work off your time that you do or money that you owed. You'd work 5, 10 years and you were done. Slavery obviously changes when we start to get to the Atlantic slave trade, where this is now a lifelong thing, and people are born into slavery, which they hadn't been before. And that's fairly, I guess, familiar. Hopefully, so I don't want to get too much into that. Feudalism is the other big um, thing that we see with um, Unit 3 in Europe. We see it in Japan where people were it's like sharecropping. I don't know if you learned that in eighth grade or not. Hopefully you did, at least if you were here in North Carolina, where you if you're a poor peasant, you work land for the landowner, and they basically you are given rent and you're allowed to live on the land. The agreement though is that you work, and some of what you grow has to go to the landowner, and all the others who work on the land or work for that landowner are noble. And if you don't meet your quota, then you're in big trouble. So, um, I mean, those are the main labor systems. I'm sure that I'm missing some, but those are the main ones I know that stand out. I know I got questions from Aaron and Gustavo, and I'm not familiar with who you are. I don't remember if you're one of my students, but welcome if you're not, or if you came late, or if you're using a pseudonym that I don't know. So hopefully that helps, Ethan. Bryce asks, how big is the Columbian Exchange as it retains the actual test? I mean, it's probably going to be a question or two. I mean, you got to remember we're covering 8,000 years of history, so nothing is going to be, say, more than I can imagine 2 questions on a test. It's usually a popular choice for maybe an essay. But considering that they did labor systems around that time last year as one of the essays, I don't know if they would do it again. They'll probably pick a different time period. So it's certainly important to know. Do you need to remember everything that was traded? No. Um, it's an interaction that saw people, plants, animals, and diseases be exchanged for the first time between the New World, which is North and South America, and the Old World, which was Africa, Europe, and Asia. Diseases usually went from most things went from the Old World to the New World, most with poor effect. Certainly, the environmental damages that animals caused, the diseases that killed natives. Most of the plants actually went from the old world or the new world to the old world, and that helped boost the population, more caloric food, etc. But you don't need to know where certain foods. There, I can't imagine they're going to ask you, is the sweet potato a new world or an old world food? Because that's going to be tough to make a multiple choice question out of that. So, um, know its significance more so than it's the ins and outs. And I'd say that for all topics, Bryce. You don't need to know the ins and outs of any big thing, the Reformation, all the details, the Reformation, the Clement Exchange, the Neolithic Revolution, any of the wars that we've talked about. Um, know maybe one or two key individuals associated with it, know one or two key places that are involved, and know the overall kind of context that it sits in the world. No cause, no effect. Hopefully that's not too vague. Aaron asks, what? I'm trying to decipher. I don't want to read this as you wrote it because I don't want to embarrass you. What do we need to know about the human body and the strides made in modern medicine, attributed mostly to the experience of Dr. Mengele in World War II? I have no idea. And I'm not too embarrassed to say that. I don't know the name. So probably not a whole lot. You need to know that modern medicine has been pushed, obviously, in the last 60 years since World War II and the Cold War. There have been a lot of advancements in medicine and technology. Not, and that's something to remember with the Cold War. Not everything is about building up atomic weapons and all of that. The space race is a byproduct of this. All kinds of anesthesias and medical things, the MRI, the Green Revolution, which I've talked a little bit about using better and healthier means to make foods, rather than relying on pesticides. We eliminated polio and other medicines or diseases and stuff like that. Those are important things to remember. What do you need to know about the human body and the strides made in modern medicine? That there have been a lot. I don't know of any specific ones. Again, probably what they'll ask you more of is contextualize that. So how, they'll ask you more a question about when have these things happened, and they may give you different time periods as or have this be a more periodization question. Where does this fit in? The work of maybe Dr. Mengele or those kinds of things. Where does this fit in the scope of time? And you'll need to know post World War II, or you'll need to know byproducts of, say, World War II and the Cold War, and that's where they can ask that question. I wouldn't get too worried about certain details or know all the things that have happened since then because, again, there's so many random ideas and questions that the AP could ask about all of history throughout the world, and stump every person who takes this test. And while this is a difficult test, and while I certainly don't want to make it sound like they won't ask any of those kind of questions, they are rare. So you may see 3 out of 70 will be that way, where they're going to ask you to know a random person or fact that maybe you just don't know. But most of them are going to be more about put an event, put something that happened, put some links between societies, compare different places. How are they similar? How are they different? Put it in context, put it in periods, periodization. Those are more important because that's the historical thinking skills, is adding context, cause and effect, those kinds of skills, analytical tools rather than just, can you memorize random facts? Okay, so hopefully that helps a little bit, Aaron. All right, we got 2 here from Gustavo. Let's see. Explain the differences in different organizations in period 6. Yeah, you do have a rise of a lot of the rise of the acronyms. And they do a lot of different things. I'll try to cover quite a few if I can, but they're all going to be different. And I know I'll miss some. I'll start with more of world diplomatic alliances and those kinds. You have the UN, which is the United Nations. That is something that every country is involved in, not all are. Um, but it's a way that the world has decided after World War II, let's all kind of have something where we can work together. We can work things out diplomatically rather than leave it to countries to sort out their differences. When countries don't do what they're supposed to, they can get kicked out of the UN. That costs them funding and aid and support from and allies. Um, which can be detrimental instead of now, hey, I've made, say, the United States mad. Then all I got to worry about now, I've made the United States mad and everybody else in the UN potentially, if say I'm North Korea, and I've got to worry about all these other countries coming after me and setting up trade embargoes or boycotting trade, etc. So that's kind of that tool. You have the EU, which is the European Union. It's the same idea, only it's for most of the European countries. Again, not all are involved, but most are. Europe again is the smallest continent there is, and so it's lots of different ethnicities and countries, and so it's a way for them to kind of work together, especially through its kind of troubled history. You had NATO and the Warsaw Pact come out after Cold War. NATO was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was the United States and a lot of Eastern or Western European countries forming an alliance so they could stop the spread of communism. There was also CETO, or the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which was the same thing. It was the United States and certain countries in Southeast Asia that were put together in hopes to stop the spread of communism. And the Warsaw Pact was the communist version of that, between the Soviet Union and most of the Eastern Bloc nations. You've got the World Bank, you've got the World Health Organization, WHO, who's in charge of overseeing kind of health and crises around the world. I mean, they're the ones who are going to go and get doctors into, say, Africa when Ebola, or South Africa when Zika now is threatening people. The CDC, or Center for Disease and Control, as well as the World Health Organization, are going to set out again to send aid and help to these places. That's the main thing that these organizations are trying to do. It's a global kind of alliance to give aid and assistance. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. The Clintons, from the Clinton era in the 90s, and this was an agreement to help spur trade in North America between the United States and some of its close allies. And that's the same with some of the other things that you see. The Marshall Plan was an economic tool done by the United States to help out European countries. Most notably, it was done to try to get Greece and Turkey from falling to communism. And basically, the condition was, if you don't become communist, then we'll give you all this money to help you rebuild after World War II. And so that's what a lot of these organizations are about. Is, if they're started back in the 1950s, it had some tie into the Cold War. If it's more recent, again, it's the idea is to be this kind of global alliance and support system. Usually, they fund and aid one another. If there are conflicts, rather than have a country be forced to act unilaterally or by itself, you can have the UN. It's a coalition. Now you've got allies to help you out. So the United States or Russia or any of these other big countries, they don't have to necessarily be the one responsible for all of the troops stopping, say, what's going on in Syria right now, or other places. And obviously, the UN is, I would say, so on how quickly they work and move to stop some of these things. So hopefully that helps. Good question, certainly. Your next question, and I've got questions from Aaron and Ethan. I'll get to you guys after this one. Excuse me. Explain the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire, as well as their government system and economy while in power. Detailed. The rise of the Ottomans is fairly easy. They came. The Turks were a clan there in the Middle East against the neighboring Byzantines. They're the ones who eventually will overthrow the Byzantines in Constantinople and take over the area. And the Ottoman Empire will really kind of grow out of what was once the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates. The Ottomans will be Muslim, and control most of the Middle East, out to really kind of parts of Persia. They will have areas along the Mediterranean, certainly what is now Israel, Jordan, Lebanon. They also controlled Egypt, parts of North Africa, and at its height, it controlled Southeast Asia, Greece, the Balkans, and um, they were, for the most part, in it. I mean, they're, since it's an empire, they were ruled by an emperor. Different than the caliphate because it wasn't a religious and spiritual leader. It was more religious and political leader. It was just a political leader. Um, Lots of battles with the Russians, lots of battles with those in Eastern Europe who didn't want to be overseen by a Muslim ruler. So you see the Ottoman Empire will shrink through most of the 16, 17, and 1800s. They're on the wrong side of World War One because they will help out Germany and the Kaiser. And one of the conditions, for the most part, at the end of the war, when they're doing the Treaty of Versailles, is that the Ottoman Empire will pretty much be shrank down to just what is now current-day Turkey. And that's kind of their fall. I mean, economically, they did well. I mean, just by its location, it's Constantinople is one of the more important cities throughout world history because it's that bridge between literally the Europe and Asia. And so the Silk Road's gone through there for almost, I mean, really over 1,000 years. And so economically, they're strong. They're one of the few that they try to industrialize, and it's a little late. But you do see some industrialization attempts in Egypt, as they're kind of still part of the Ottoman Empire, kind of break away. And so hopefully that helps. I mean, it's one of the three kind of famous gunpowder empires, which I'll tie into the next question. There in the Middle East, that kind of rises out of the ashes of what was the Mongol Empire after the Mongols defeated the caliphates, and certainly the most successful of the three that come out of that. And a lot of that, again, is due to its location and due to the fact that the Turks are a pretty strong militaristic nation and peoples. They've been fighting in the Middle East amongst other tribes and areas. They've been fighting with the Byzantines for centuries. They also are better off because they're a little bit more religiously tolerant. They realize that there's still a large influx of Christians in that area, and rather than persecute them or decide not to work with them, they realize that if they try to have a better relationship with them, that strengthens the empire and keeps them from having religious conflicts and internal struggles and say bringing in outside people if say they were to persecute Christians or anything like that. That's where you see like the Janissaries and some of them and their strength. So hopefully that helps. And I'll tie this into the next question, even though it wasn't necessarily next. But the gunpowder empires were the Ottomans there in the Middle East, the Safavids, which is modern day Iran, or the Persian, what was the Persian Empire will become Iran. And you have the Mughals in India. And all of them kind of have aspects of Muslim. The Ottomans are mostly Sunni. The Safavids are Shia. And the Mughals are a combination of Muslim and Hindu, and you'll start to see Sikhs. That's around the time that the Sikh religion comes to power, and so you'll see those three working as harmoniously, I guess, as they can. But those are the big three, and again, they're the gunpowder empires because this is where you start to see gunpowder move from China, where it was invented, start to spread west to these areas and into Europe, and really it was a means that those that had these technologies were able to gain power and keep it. So, and all to different successes. They have different rulers that rule different ways. But again, the big three you need to know. I mean, the Ottomans are most successful. The Safavids are Shia, and that's probably the main thing you need to remember about them. And then it's Iran and Persian. And the Mughals were in India. That's when the Taj Mahal is built. Big into culture and those kinds of things. Tried their best to unite a large Muslim and Hindu populations there in India, as well as an emerging Sikh one. I think Aaron had the next question. I got Bryce and Aaron. You guys are on cue. What are the Indian empires and major events for each ones? Well, we start all the way back with Indus River Valley, um, and the Harappan, I guess, invention of Hinduism. Buddhism comes during that time. The caste system is created during that time. And again, a caste system only is in India, and still exists today. You can read articles about some of the awful things that unfortunately still happen between in India because of things set up hundreds and not thousands of years ago with the determining a different caste. If you say tried to marry outside your caste, and there are stories of men and women being brutally beaten and raped because of these kinds of things, and very, I mean, brutal and barbaric means of punishment that still go on in these areas today. Um, you then had the Mauryan, and that's with Ashoka and the first Buddhist ruler. They then comes the Gupta, and they go back to being more Hindu and traditional. And you see the same with China. Usually a new religion comes in. Hey, this is nice. This is new. This is different. Somebody's come in and gonna say, no, we need to go back. We need to be traditional values. All that. It's the same rhetoric you hear in politics today in our country. We need to return to core values and all that crap. So Gupta, you go back to more Hindu ideals. Um, they're really kind of in this just state where it's more individual city states and smaller areas. Trade becomes real big for most of Unit 3. You start to have Islam make its way in with the Sufi mystics and others during Unit 3. The Mughals will come in Unit 4, and we talked about them with the gunpowder empires. Once the Mughals are done, the British pretty much come right after that, and they will they'll take different princes from different areas, get them to be kind of their puppets. Eventually, Britain will fully subjugate the colony, all the way up till 1947 with the partition of India, and that's where India is turned into two different states, Islam and India, and you have about 12 million people displaced, Muslims living in what would become India, Hindus or Sikhs living in what was going to become Pakistan, and they had to move. It's a very bloody and violent period in history. About 1 million people or so dying because of that. And since then, that's obviously Gandhi is big with the colonization or independence movements there, along with Nehru, and Ali Jinnah was big with the creation of Pakistan. And so those are kind of it. India's always been at the forefront of the spice trade, big with textiles. And they do a lot to supply Britain with its textile industry and industrialization. That's all the ones I can kind of think about are major events from there. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Bryce, which AP review book do you recommend? Any of them, really. I don't think there's a bad one. The one I used, I'm at home, so I don't have it with me. It was called Strive for a 5. But the Princeton Reviews is good. Any of the ones that certainly if you're pressed and you got to go to a Barnes and Nobles or a place like that to buy one, make sure it has a practice exam in there. I know it's kind of late, but if you want to go through and just to see some questions tomorrow of what a test would look like, that'll help. And again, go find a junior or somebody who took it last year, beg, borrow, steal, take their review book. If they didn't burn it after they took the test, see if they got it and they'll loan it to you or sell it to you, or like I said, beat them up and take it from them and then apologize Friday and give it back to them or something. I don't know. But I don't think you can go wrong. They're all good. Just make sure that they have an exam. And flip through it. If it covers everything, then it's what you need. I don't think any of these review books are poor necessarily, or they're probably not going to last if they say they're missing something. And try to make sure you certainly get something that's newer, just so it's current and up to date with how the test is set up, etc. All right, Aaron asks, Can you review the major Chinese empires and dynasties and the major points from them? Okay, I'll do my best. I mean, there's a lot. You've got the whole song, the Shengzhou, Qin Han. I won't sing the song, and then Shui, Tang Song, Yuan Ming Qing Republic, and Communist China. So those are your dynasties. Um, Shang and Zhao are very, very early Chinese histories, ancient river valley times. Qin is the first one who's going to, and that's Qin Shi Huang is the emperor who goes through and is able to unite most of the different states and provinces in China under one rule, standardizes a lot of the things there, units, measurements, money, starts the building of the Great Wall. Very important, very oppressive ruler, and so his rule doesn't last very long. The Hans follow him and take some of the things that he did. And you saw, I'm sorry, if you go back to Zhao, that's when Confucianism and Taoism are started. Qin has more legalism, which is more, the religion should be you follow what the emperor says, and that's all that matters. Confucians come in, or I'm sorry, the Han Dynasty comes in, Confucians back in power, the rise of the civil service exam, the scholar gentry, the intellectual kind of rise that you begin to see in China that will lead them to the Golden Age will start with Han China. Tang Song, you see most of the great inventions, paper, gunpowder, a lot of agricultural ones. The Great Wall will be built a little bit more up. The Grand Canal we built during this time. Profits off the silk trade are Han, Tang, and Song. China's silk production blows up and becomes huge during this time. Yuan is the time when the Mongols take over with Kublai Khan, and they throw most of the old customs out of the window. The Ming take over, kick out the Mongols, and go back to Confucianism, the civil service exam, scholar gentry, all of those things. You start to see Zhang He, and his travels are started during the Ming Empire, but stop because this is where they finish the Great Wall and make it as expansive as it is. Excuse me. You then have the Qing, who come in, Boxer Rebellion, Taiping Rebellion, the Opium Wars, the opening up of China to the West happens during this time period. Not very good for any of those events are very good for Chinese rulers in history. The revolutions of 1911 bring about the Republic, which formally ends kind of the dynasty system in China. It's a big thing that's often kind of overlooked. Sun Yat-sen tries to lead. Soon, though, they get pulled into the world wars, especially World War II, as they are fighting off Imperial Japan through most of the 1930s and early 40s. And then comes Mao's revolution, and China's becoming communist. You've got a lot of things go on there. The 5-year plans and the Cultural Revolution. I mean, Mao's China is very similar to Stalin's Soviet Union, where any kind of dissent was seen as a threat. Intellectualism is seen as a threat, and really, you're ruling by fear. There's not a whole lot of communism necessarily. Its principle with this whole ideas of equality and whatnot. Mao wants all of his people to be, I guess, equal under him. And so it's not a very good time for China. They're slowly, obviously, come out of that and become much more agricultural or technologically based. And you're in the 21st century now, really one of the leaders in global trade, etc. So hopefully that covers a decent deal there. So next, rise of the Byzantine due to the fall of Roman Empire, and what was their fall? The rise of the Roman Empire is going to be because of, yes, the fall of Rome somewhat. More of it, the rise of the East goes all the way back to Constantine, when he's the one who, and Diocletian even before him, Rome got so big they split it to East and West. Constantine moves the capital from Rome to Constantinople, and so really Rome kind of was trying to move that way. I guess you know, in theory, to move itself a little bit closer to Asia and some of the trade that way. And so as Rome kind of falls apart with weak leaders in the West, East is able to have stronger leaders, Justinian and others, who were able to stabilize and keep Europe, that part of the Roman Empire, together a bit more. You also didn't have some of the strong neighbors like you had in the West. The West, you had the Gauls in Germany, the Carthaginians in North Africa, and others, where in the Byzantines you had a volatile Middle East that still was broken up into many different tribes fighting amongst one another. Russia isn't a big country or empire yet. Persia is pretty much gone by now. So there isn't really the same kind of threats to the Byzantines that you see to Western Rome. And they did have the stronger leaders, the better. Most of the economic and intellectuals all went from Rome to Constantinople when the capital was moved, and so that's a big reason why they're able to kind of flourish. Their fall happens. Ultimately, it's years and years of fighting with the neighboring Turks takes its toll, and the Turks are able to take them over 1453, and so that really is what ultimately leads to their fall, and that's what leads to the rise of the Ottoman Empire, is able to take over from there and most importantly capture Constantinople. But their fall, obviously, it's not that simple as far as why they fell. I mean, there are other reasons, like all, there's internal corruption, there are economic issues, there's all kinds of different things that are at play, that weaken it to the point that the Byzantine or the Turks are able to come in and finish them off. So, next question: key differences and similarities between the French, American, and Haitian revolutions. Um, American and Haitians are similar that they're both revolutions against an imperial country who oversees them. The difference between the two is Haiti is a slave colony of France, where the American colony is not a slave colony of Britain. There's not France is really kind of an outlier because France is fighting against its own people. Of the three, the French Revolution is much more violent and volatile than you see the Americans or Haitians. Those are more independence movements than France is going to be. Similar issues, yes. I mean, it's led by the, I guess, common people, issues with taxation and representation and all of those things. This apathy toward being overlooked, while the church and wealthy landowners kind of got everything. Um, I would say the French Revolution is much more. The American is the first of those three, and the American Revolution is going to probably inspire a lot of. It plays a big role in French Revolution. France is partially bankrupt because of all the money they spent helping the Americans during the American Revolution. It's also going to inspire some of the people in France to rebel, seeing how effective it was um, in America. That if the Americans can go and fight back, then maybe so can we. Haiti's going to kind of use both of those revolutions for inspiration and say, well, if America is won its independence, then maybe so can we. And France, most of you French people just fought the revolution saying that you shouldn't be ruled by tyrants and people um, that don't have your best interest in mind. So how can you now go ahead and say that you can control us when you just fought against all those commons ideals? So I guess that's how they're kind of key linked and brought together. Obviously, Haiti is, the names to know. Napoleon comes out of the French Revolution as their leader. Toussaint is one of the big ones that led the Haitian Revolution, and hopefully you all know all the names involved with the American Revolution: Washington, Jefferson, etc. We'll do a few more. Do we need to know many rulers? I would say, yeah, know the important ones, and again, where they fit in, what they did. If they're associated with a big event, then that's yes, you do need to know that. Do you need to remember some of the trivial things? No, like Peter the Great's ideas about Westernization and shaving the beards off the warriors and stuff. Do you have to remember that? No. Um, no, he's from Russia. I'd say it's much more important to know at least where these rulers are from. Um, because a lot of times, even if you can associate who and where, that can sometimes eliminate some of the answer choices. Because that's, again, these aren't necessarily questions, they're statements. And if you go through and can eliminate the fact that, okay, I know that um, you mentioned Justinian. I know Justinian is from the Byzantines, fairly early Byzantines. So I know that he is not going to be in Western Rome. If that's an answer choice, he's not going to be fighting the Turks because he wasn't at the end of the Byzantine era. So that can eliminate a choice. And hopefully that'll help you kind of dwindle it down. Um, but I'd say if you're going to know rulers, it's more important to know, again, context and periodization and all that stuff around it. Who are they? Where are they from? What's the big event they tie to? And when does that happen? If you think back to those matching trios, and I think for Unit 4, if you go to that page, I went and put all of the matching trios for all 6 units and the answers on that. So if you have that Google link, you can go through and again tie the people, the place, and kind of the vocab term together, or the event. That was the big thing and the easy way to kind of work to move forward. So, can I explain the cause and outcomes of the Cold War? Sure. Causes are going to be the rise of communism. It's going to be World War II, and then the rise of communism. Um, the communist scare in the United States really begins back in the 1920s. Again, communism really goes against all that capitalism is about, and that's what the United States, obviously, that's our big principle is, businesses run things how they want, little government interaction. Um, they see communism as a threat, as this whole idea of um, you're trying to take away what I've rightfully earned and share it with others, etc. Um, but with World War II, I mean, very little. I mean, really, the only fighting that happens on U.S. soil is going to be Pearl Harbor. The Soviets, for the most part, because of the non-aggression pact they signed with Germany and Hitler in 1939, they really avoid war for about the first 2 or 3 years happening on Russian soil. And so when the Germans finally do attack, Stalin's prepared. They're able to use kind of slash and burn techniques with their crops and other things. The Germans get stuck in Russia in winter, which never goes well for anyone who's ever tried it. And so Russia's, the Hitler never makes it to Moscow or Stalingrad or Leningrad, these big cities. So Russia's really not all that weakened because of the war, like Britain, like France, like Germany are, Japan. And so you see these two countries really rise to the forefront of the global scheme, and they have completely different economic ideas, political ideas. You've got a democratically elected president, one, you have a dictator, autocratic dictator, and the other, who, if they have elections, it's rigged, and he's the only person on the box you can pick. Freedom of choice, no freedom of choice, civil liberties, no civil liberties. Uh, so socially, culturally, politically, economically, these two countries that couldn't be further from each other, and both see the other as a threat to their way of life. Soviet Union feels that what they're doing is right, and they fear that the United States and Western Europe, now that they've gotten rid of Hitler, they fear that communism is going to be the next target, and so they start to take over the Eastern Bloc and other nations to strengthen themselves, to prepare just in case they ever wanted to come and take them over. And the United States sees it the same way. They see that communists are moving to other countries. They just got rid of Hitler. They fear Stalin and some of the things that they breakdowns you see in some of the peace conferences during World War II. You see tensions happen. I mean, Stalin's mad that he feels that the United States and Britain kind of left him hanging for a little while, and it didn't come to his aid soon enough. Um, the Churchill and Roosevelt and Truman don't trust Stalin at all and fear that he's going to go and do some of the similar things that Hitler did with taking over countries, and so um, it just builds from there. And this was something that would be a conflict between these two areas, not just through war. Although you really, other than Cuba, you don't see the United States and Soviet Union ever really get any kind of escalated conflicts. Vietnam and Korea, both the main allies of those are China, not the Soviet Union. Um, but this plays out in sports and the Olympics. I mean, it's why the 1980 hockey victory is still seen as one of the greatest uh, events in all of U.S. sport. It's not just because the United States was not very good at hockey at the time and the Soviet Union was. It was also the ramifications it had in the global scheme of this Cold War. It's why the space race is so big. It's why both countries spend millions upon millions of dollars trying to get into space and going through and um, one up the other. Um, and so you this competition is going to play itself out from 1940s to really about 1990. And the reason that ends is with the rise of television and other things, you start to see some of these Eastern Bloc countries and people in Soviet Union see what it's like in other places, and they don't like the fact that you know they can see what's going on in America or Western Europe and realize that hey, all of the awful things you tell us about aren't necessarily true, and they're going bankrupt. Communism economically was not sustainable the way it was run in those countries, and so Gorbachev eventually will start to put in restrictions to limit, or I guess empower and give a little bit more civil liberties and rights, give a little bit more economic freedom, and eventually gets to the point where the whole thing collapses. When the Soviet Union falls in 1990, the Berlin Wall comes down in 1989, and you see the countries that were under this kind of the Eastern Bloc and Soviet Union. Several of them are given independence. Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic countries of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, all of the ones in Central Asia like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Armenia. Yugoslavia split into several different countries that you see now: Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia Herzegovina. So um, those are all kind of outcomes of the uh, Cold War. Certainly, you've got lots of proxy wars that happen because of this. This whole idea of containment, Korea, Vietnam, Iran Contra comes out of that. The uh, you know, wars in Grenada and in other places. The United States gets in bed with a lot of really awful people that were probably just as bad as Stalin um, as far as dictators go, but because they were communist, they're I guess that whole idea of well, he's a terrible guy, but he's our guy, and so we made a lot of deals with people like that, and that probably ruined a lot of countries in South Africa or South America and Africa as well, and it's why you see the America is kind of where the role it's in now is for years we stepped out and would intervene in a lot of places, and now it's to the point where if the United States is almost kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If we help, we're meddling and in people's business when we shouldn't be. If we don't help, then we don't care, and we're leaving people to die and suffer. So there's no kind of right way that we can go about these anymore. But we were certainly the only country left standing um, after the Cold War ended. So hopefully that was good enough. Any other questions? Certainly, I'll put the link up for this if anybody wants to go through and go back over this on YouTube. As I've said, there are a lot of other really good review things going on at this time. Hopefully you're able to make it to the Kahoot review. I know that was on earlier. And if I see any for tomorrow night, I'll put them up there. And any final advice about the exam? Yes, I would say don't, as I said at the beginning, I guess, don't over analyze and don't question yourself. If you go through and you read a question and an answer pops in your head, and it's one it goes it I mean it matches up really well with one of the four that answer choices, then that's the answer and move on. Don't overthink. I mean, there have been so many times, whether it was my tests and quizzes, and it happens all the time on these, where you put an answer down and um, and then you go back and you're like, no, it's maybe it's something else. You get talked into another answer by reading and rereading some of these answer choices. Don't do that. Go with your gut a lot of time. If nothing else, you know, as if you're going to go down, I mean, go down feeling confident rather than going down being like, oh well, I answered 50 and I think I did fairly well, but I talked myself into some, but I only got through 55 questions. I'd rather you try to get through all 70 and and feel good about them, even if it's um, I guess kind of short lived. Or I should say not short lived, even if it's something that you think not all that much about. Um, and I guess I'd say too, I mean, don't, I guess, discredit all the work that you've done. Certainly if I think I'm only talking to my students, but just in case anybody else from other classes have come in, I know that you've had three people teach you this class. The fact that you've endured and survived and made it this far, I think you guys all um, have done really well. And uh, trust your intuition, trust the things that you know and that you've learned, and um, it doesn't matter what that score will tell you in July when you get it. I'm really proud that you guys have all stuck it out and made it this far. So don't get too caught up. It's a test. It's not going to define you. It's not going to be the be all and end all. I had great students last year, get twos. I had great students who I swore would get fives, got threes and fours. It doesn't make them any less of a great student and a great person and all of those things. It's, if you're worrying about these things for college and whatnot, it's simply just a piece of the puzzle. And you all have many bigger and better attributes to yourselves on a resume or application than one AP score. So, um, and get a really good night's sleep tomorrow and eat breakfast Wednesday or Thursday morning and dress warm. Because as I said, that the church, unless they changed it, the church should be about the same temperature as my room there is. So, and if that's the case, then y'all know you're gonna freeze. So make sure you bring a sweatshirt or a jacket, and don't be afraid. I mean, go ask the people that have already tested or took it last year if they've got notes, or as I said, if you got any questions, email me, to tweet me, whatever, and I'll help you out as best I can. And gladly you're welcome. Um, to all of you saying thanks. It's certainly it's what I do. It's the least I can do um, to help you through this. I'm still, I feel I'm responsible for you all, obviously. So I'm gonna try to do my best to make sure that I can give you as best help that I can, um, and hopefully prepare you as best I can. So, any last minute things? Certainly, I'm going to shut it down here in a minute because I think I'm going to run out of time on this. But any last minute things you think of throughout the day, tomorrow or tonight, um, email, tweet, whatever. Um, Last minute questions, ask and I'll help. I usually got my little work computer here with me 24/7, so I'll help you out. But good luck to you guys. I know you guys will all do really well. Share the link with everyone and anyone that wants it. Hopefully, there's some good stuff on here that you guys can share. So, um, y'all do real well. All right, I believe in you guys. So have faith. Don't get too overwhelmed, and you guys will kick ass. I know. All right. gonna sign out now. Thank you guys for coming and asking really good questions. And I'll see you when I see you.